It's Anzac Day on Sunday and thousands of Tasmanians will stop to think about the sacrifice made by so many in warfare. One person who will never forget his experiences in World War II is Eric Canning. His story of escape from a highly guarded Italian prisoner of war camp has been largely unheard. The Tasmanian, along with 18 other Australians and New Zealanders, used his tin helmet to dig a tunnel out of the camp and flee to nearby mountains. Mr Canning is the only one of the 19 still alive. He's in his 90s and suffering from emphysema, but the years haven't faded his memory of the extraordinary escape, which was one of the largest ever attempted in Europe during World War II. He spoke to State Line's Lucy Shannon.
At home in Kingston in southern Tasmania, 91-year-old Eric Canning tells a remarkable story. The events took place more than 60 years ago, but Mr Canning describes them with the most vivid remembrance.
Whereas nowadays I have trouble remembering what happened the day before yesterday, all these events are quite clearly burnt into my memory.
Such extraordinary events would be hard to forget. They took place in 1942 at a prisoner of war camp in northern Italy, known simply as Camp 57.
We've got nothing much to do other than think about how to get out of the beastly place. So escaping was always in the minds of prisoners of war.
It wasn't long after leaving Australia as an RAAF wireless operator that Sergeant Canning was captured by Rommel's troops in northern Africa. He ended up at Camp 57 in 1941.
And the Colonel pointed out that in the First World War, no prisoners ever escaped from Italy and none would escape from his camp. We naturally had ambitions to prove the Colonel wrong. The first attempt at escape was a New Zealander called Private Wright, who attempted a wire crawl, always the most dangerous method of trying to get out of a camp. And he was shot at fairly close range. When the Battle of El Alamein occurred, they started bringing prisoners into a new compound, number 3, which was adjacent to the compound I was in. Our explorers found that the alluvium at a depth of about 12 feet was friable enough to warrant the attempt of a tunnel. We'd managed to pinch a pick and we used tin hats as a shovel. There were plenty of tin hats around the place, but this was the only pick. By the time we'd finished the tunnel, the pick was worn down to about 4 inches, and we put all the spoil of the tunnel under the floorboards. We'd calculated that we'd bring the tunnel up at about 145 feet in a crop of millet, where it would be unobserved from the guard boxes and machine gun posts guarding the compound.
In the 5 to 6 weeks it took to dig the tunnel, the prisoners found it hard to breathe. They came up with an innovative solution.
We built a set of high-pressure bellows and used the conduit from the electrical installation of a hut as a delivery pipe, which enabled us to get a minimum supply of air to the face of the tunnel. I remember years later talking to a friend of mine who lived up the street from me here, Brigadier Gordon Walsh, who said, "I could never have done it, Eric." He said, "I couldn't have done it." I said, "Gordon, we didn't have anyone there age 80. And I wouldn't like to do it now either. It would petrify me at the age of 90.
Luck was on the tunneller's side on a number of occasions, including when Sergeant Canning came up from his digging shift and walked around the compound, forgetting he had a dirty black face.
So I repaired to the nearby kitchen to wash off this incriminating evidence, only to be accosted by the bloke in charge of the kitchen, Charlie Stewart, who said, "What have you been up to?" And I said, "Charlie, you haven't seen nothing." So we left the secret unexplained.
The night of the escape came in October 1942. 19 Australians and New Zealanders crawled through the tunnel, which was less than a metre high and about half a metre wide.
One bloke, Kevin O'Connell, got caught in a roving searchlight and froze, as good soldiers are supposed to do. And the searchlight moved on, left him undetected. I remember Dick Head, after we were all recaptured, said to Kevin, "Your training stood you in good stead, Kev." He said, "You just froze." He said, "Training be jiggered." He said, "I was paralysed with fear."
He relishes the stories of the reaction back in Camp 57 when the escape was discovered.
This bloke came rushing across saying, "Morticelli, son of Manco, sete uomini." He said, "I'm missing 7 men. "Go away," said Morticelli. "I've got troubles of my own. I'm missing 12.
Yugoslavia was about 50 kilometres away, but a soldier in the camp had warned against heading there. So the plan was to aim for the more distant Switzerland across the Alps.
From the camp, of course, looking at the mountains of the Julian Alps, they all looked to be covered in vegetation and uninhabited. But when we got up in the mountains, we found they were heavily populated.
After just a few days on the run, they were recaptured.
Unknown to us, of course, we launched ourselves into a resting unit of the Italian army. We all stood up, and the Italian closest to us was almost paralysed. We had to say to him, "Don't be afraid." So he proceeded to fire shots into the air and throw hand grenades, and all the people in the valley below, who all came streaming up to us, and we were then taken prisoner again and escorted back into a village down below.
They were met by a sympathetic Italian colonel who said he understood how they felt because he had escaped and been recaptured in World War I.
While we were talking to the colonel, a brigadier from the Carabinieri burst into the room and said, "Oh, there you are," he said, "you've been treated well up to date," he said, "and now you're going to be treated badly." And the colonel said to him, "Brigadier," he said, "Vieni qua, come here." And so the brigadier vieni quad, and the colonel blew a few words of wisdom down his ear, and the brigadier turned and said to us, "Buongiorno," he said, "good morning."
Changed his tune.
So, from being an enemy, he turned himself into a friend.
The brigadier kept his promise to treat the escapees relatively well.
What he had told me was that he was supposed to beat me up, but don't take any notice, while he went round the room shuffling his feet and hitting the wall. And I realised then that he was supposed to beat me up. Had he done so, I would have retaliated and I would have automatically, I suppose, been shot. So inadvertently, or unexpectedly, probably that colonel saved my life. As far as I know, I think it was the largest mass escape up to that time enacted in Europe. Only a few years ago, I thought I'd like to have a reunion of any survivors of those escapees. There were 14 Australian personnel and 5 New Zealanders, but it transpired that I'm the only Australian of the 14 left alive, and there was 1 New Zealander, Roy Natouche. I finished up in hospital with a bout of pneumonia, and I was about to ring Natouche to say I couldn't come over when his daughter-in-law rang me to say that he had died. So I am the only survivor of the 19. They all have just faded out, comparatively unsung.
Remarkable story.